So, a very good morning and thank you for joining us in this webinar on Monetize Your Intangible Assets for Profit and Growth. Okay, my name is Pei Wen and I lead the enterprise engagement in IPOS International, and it's my pleasure to be a host for this IP Expert Series. So the IP Expert Series is IPOS International's webinar series that delivers actionable insights and tips on intangible assets and intellectual property for innovative enterprises. So each interactive webinar features our subject matter experts exploring topics on IP rights protection, strategy, international protection, monetization, and many more. So for today's session, I have the pleasure of inviting Mr. Ye Thu Aung, IP Strategist of IPOS International, to share with us the possible way of making money from your intangible assets and what are the considerations you must make along the way. Then we would have a special guest joining us to share their company's journey on how they monetize their intangible assets for profit and growth. The last part of this webinar will be an interview session between Ye Thu and this inspiring entrepreneur. And if you have any question to ask any one of them at any one point of time, feel free to type your question using the Q&A function on this platform, and we will try to get them answered during the last part of the webinar. So before I pass the time to Ye Thu, who will share insights and practical advice on the topic, let me give you a short introduction about him. So Ye Thu is listed on IAM Strategy 300. Ye Thu uses his unique blend of IP knowledge, technical expertise, and strong business acumen to advise both public agency and innovative enterprises on IP management and strategy. Prior to joining IPOS International, Ye Thu worked as an in-house IP professional with Panasonic, leading a team of IP analysts to deliver a host of IP solutions, including IP portfolio analysis, IP due diligence, patent monetization, etc., to internal stakeholders to chart their strategic roadmap. So, Ye Thu, thank you for joining us today. I'll pass the time over to you.
Thank you, Pei Wen. Let me pull up my slides. Can you see the full screen?
Yes, I can.
Okay, great. Good morning, everyone. Yeah, and thanks, Pei Wen, for your kind introduction. Today we are going to talk about how to monetize your intangible assets for your profit and growth. Our observation is that enterprises usually struggle when it comes to IP commercialization. Most of them are good at IP creation. To a certain extent, some understand how to protect their IP, but still many companies focus on registrable type of IPs like patents and trademarks. But in this webinar, I will mainly focus on three key areas. First, I will give you a quick overview on how intangible assets create value for enterprises. Second, I will give you a framework on how you can navigate your IP journey towards extracting value from your intangible assets. Last but not least, I'm going to cover different monetization options for intangible assets in a bit more details. Okay, let's talk a little bit about why and how intangible assets should be considered as strategic business assets and how they can create value for businesses. The chart shows the S&P 500 companies in the US and their tangible versus intangible assets ratio. As you can see, back in 1975, intangible assets of S&P 500 companies accounted for less than 20% of companies' value. More than 80% of the company's value is in their tangible assets like land and factories. Fast forward to 2020, and the tables have completely flipped, right? So about 90% of S&P 500 companies' value are now in intangible assets. This is because we now have companies like Google, Facebook, or Meta, Apple, and Amazon who has intangible assets. Those companies' intangible assets may be even more than 90%. This really illustrates the growing importance of intangible assets to companies operating today. So what are the intangible assets that I'm talking about? I'll quickly go through this. In general, there are two categories of intangible assets: registrable and non-registrable types. Most of you may be more familiar with registrable types of intangible assets, but there are still a whole lot of non-registrable type of intangible assets, which are also key for business growth. You need to manage both. Another reason why intangible assets are so valuable and important is because having strong intangible assets increases opportunities for value creation. Imagine today you have a weak intangible assets. It may not be very attractive, and the only way you can monetize it is by deploying it in your own product and services in the commodity market. On the other hand, if you have strong intangible assets, perhaps in the form of good IP protection over a successful product, you have more options to monetize it. For example, you could license the technology to another company, or you can use them to attract bigger companies to partner with you. While you may not activate all these options, having them in place gives you more flexibility to grow and scale the company in a sustainable manner. For example, when the pandemic becomes more stable, you need to pivot your business very, very quickly, right? Otherwise, you will be very late and your competitors will run ahead of you. So it will be harder to pivot when you have weak intangible assets and lesser monetization options. I'll explain each monetization option in more details shortly. This is the innovation cycle. I just wanted to know that just one thing, innovation without commercialization is nothing. Innovation is about bringing your ideas to the market to solve real world problems. You start with ideas and turn them into intangible assets. You then leverage those intangible assets to differentiate you from your competitors, commercialize them to get the revenue, and reinvest in the next generation of innovation. Innovation should not be a one-off event. To continually hold a competitive edge, businesses should look at innovation as a continuous cycle of ideas. So let me give you a very high-level framework. This framework shows you how you can manage your intangible assets. Start from the basics. You need to have a proper frameworks and tools to identify how to protect and manage your intangible assets. Then you need to see what's your filing strategy for your registrable types of intangible assets like patents and trademarks. And you also need to know how to manage your non-registrable types of intangible assets like know-how and trade secrets. After that, you need to manage your intangible asset portfolio in line with your corporate objective. You must know all these, and what are your core and non-intangible assets before you think about commercialization options. Let me walk you through a few scenarios and what commercialization option you can pursue for each scenario. For example, if you are in a mobile communications industry and your intangible assets or IP also has a utility in vehicle communication sector as well, you can either use your intangible assets and enter this up-and-coming industry by yourself, or you can partner with some tier 1 suppliers in the automotive industry to launch new products together, or you can just choose to license the technology to the third party, right? If you really don't want to enter into this industry, you can also choose to sell your intangible assets to those who might need it. Of course, those might not affect your core competitive advantage. If your intangible assets has no value in any industry, you can consider abandoning it, since there will be costs involved if you continue keeping them. That's how you can cost effectively manage your intangible asset portfolio. And that's one of the most important aspects in extracting value from your intangible assets. If you're choosing the licensing model, you also need to know how to structure your deal and see which licensing model is suitable for your intangible assets. Most of you may have already known about different types of licensing, so I won't go through them in details in this webinar. Okay, let's talk about different commercialization options and see how you can monetize your intangible assets, in short IA, or intellectual property, in short IP. Generally, there are 5 different options on how you can monetize your IA or IP. Of course, you can say that there are a few other options like IP financing, whereby you put your IP as a collateral to get some loans from the financial institutions like banks. But in today's webinar, I will be mainly focusing on these 5 options that you can see on the screen. Before I move on, let me explain a few things. Each commercialization model will be explained based on 4 factors. Just to measure expectation, the number of stars are for indicative purposes only and how to show how each commercialization model is different to one another. Reward can be in terms of both monetary and non-monetary returns. Risk involve both operational and IP risk. Resource means both financial, human, and other resources like systems and tools. Control shows how much control do you have over the IA or IP that you commercialized. Let's start with deployment. Reward depends on whether the product or service that you're commercializing is successful. If the product is successful, you can definitely get higher returns. Of course, you can still outsource some parts of your product since you may not want to get involved in the entire value chain. For example, Apple. Apple has their proprietary OS for iPhones, iPads, MacBook, and Apple Watch. Their technology is closely guarded, and they use their IA or IP for their products and services, mostly, right? Deployment model involve heavy IP and operational risk. That's important. You might be running a risk of infringing third-party IP rights. Heavy resources and expenses are also required in this model, since you have to do everything from ideation, product development, sales and marketing, etc. But you do have a higher degree of control over how IA or IP is used when you're using deployment model. The next one is partnership model. In this model, you're using an IA or IP as a tool for strategic partnerships. Partnerships can be as strong as in the form of JV, joint ventures. Returns may be in the form of profit sharing, lump sum, or royalty payments. In this model, you and your partner are sharing IP or operational risk, depending on how you structure the partnership, of course. In the case of JV, resources will be required to manage and operate the JV, and even to manage a partner to ensure strategic directions of both parties are aligned. Depending on the model you choose, you may get involved in the operational matters. As such, you still have some control over how IA or IP is used in this whole partnership. Next, we are going to talk about licensing. This is more about out-licensing. Depending on how you structure the deal, you will get the royalty payments, which will create a recurring revenue for you. Since you still have ownership over IA or IP, you are still sharing the risks with the licensee, but not so much on the operational risk. You're sharing more on the IP risk. Resources will be required to manage a licensee and to maintain the IP. Depending on the arrangements, licensee may or may not need to pay the maintenance fee in the case of registered IPs like patents or trademarks. Since you still have ownership over the IP you license out, you have some level of control over the IP as agreed in the licensing contracts. For example, how to use, where to use, and how long the licensee can use the IP. So it really depends on how you structure the deal. You still have some control over this. The next model is spin-off. In this model, IP may be licensed or assigned to the spin-off company. Of course, you must be you must reach some level to actually create some spin-off companies. Returns can be in the form of equity, profit sharing, lump sum, or royalty payments, depending on either assignment or licensing model that you choose. If you choose the licensing model, you're sharing risk on IP, but lesser or no operational risk. But it also runs risk of spin-off not being successful, which may have negative impact on your financials that you have invested in this spin-off. You need some form of initial investment, both financial and human resources, for the spin-off to sustain it independently in the future. Depending on whether assignment or licensing model is chosen, there will be less or no control over IP. But even if it is the assignment, you, as the licensor, can insert clawback clauses in the contracts to take back your IP if the spin-off company doesn't meet the agreed milestones. Last but not least, you can sell your IP if you no longer need it or no interest in entering the new markets. In that case, you no longer own the IP. Usually, you can decide to receive lump sum payment. Rewards can be higher depending on whether it's a stronger IP or not. Since you sell off your IP and transfer the ownership to the buyer, you no longer need them to manage the risk and expenses. Of course, you will also have no control over the IP or IA since it has already been assigned to the buyer in this case. This is the final message that I want to give you in my presentation. First, IA or IP must be managed and commercialized in line with your company's mission and vision. Understand your both business and IP strategies and how they work together. That's important. Your IP strategy cannot be a standalone strategy. It must be aligned with your business strategy as well. Next, you need to put in enough consideration to your IA or IP commercialization journey and explore all possible options and outcomes prior to embarking on any commercialization projects. Consider all available pathways to maximize value creation and value capture for your company. Take note, there's no one-size-fits-all IP commercialization models. You will need to choose one or a few models that fit your needs. Last but not least, have a clear policy and guidelines in the approaches towards IA or IP commercialization. Don't make your decisions on ad hoc basis as and when the opportunity comes. Again, your IP strategy must be aligned to your corporate goals. With that, I will conclude my presentation and hand it back to Pei Wen. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ye Thu. Yep. Thank you, Ye Thu, for the useful tips. So I hope we all learned something. So as mentioned, for today's webinar, we have also invited a very inspiring entrepreneur to share with us his journey on how he has successfully deployed his intangible assets to achieve profit and growth. Let's watch an introduction about his company first.
We try to use mycelium technology to create a powerful or novel next generation materials for fashion industries and building applications. This material can save 70% of water, 68% global warming potential, and 17% of energy reduction. In terms of target market, we are focusing in Asia first. We successfully attract 600 global major brands from 51 countries. And currently we work collaborate with tens of global major brands to bring these materials to their market. MYCL proud to win this award because we see the intangible asset is the future of company's value. By having this award, we can grow the company by doing more innovation.
All right. So the guest speaker today is none other than the CEO and a co-founder of MYCL, also known as Mycotech, Mr. Reza Nugroho. So let me give an introduction about him. So Adi is the co-founder and CEO of MYCL, or we also call it Mycotech, a biotech startup that produces sustainable material for the global market. Mycotech provides high-performance and low-impact biomaterial for fashion and building applications. So under his leadership, Mycotech has been recognized both locally and internationally, winning various awards such as the 2018 DBS Social Enterprise Awards, 2019 MIT Soft Circular Economic Challenge, and not forgetting the recent WIPO-IPOS IP for Innovation Awards. So Adi finds that part of the social entrepreneurship ecosystem is also being part of the world solution, not only for profit, but also with impact. Let's hear from him directly. Hi, Adi. Thank you for joining us in this webinar.
Yeah, hi, Paiwan. So
Hi.
excited.
Thank you. I'll pass the time over to you to share more about your journey.
Sure. Yeah. So yeah, I'm Adi, CEO and co-founder of MYCL. I think today I would like to share our innovations that we developed for the past 3 years and how we can see the intangible assets is having or playing a biggest role in our innovations and how we can commercialize it. So the innovations that we developed is Mycelium Leather, or we can call it mushroom leather. Something that I'm wearing it today, like this watch straps here. I also have a wallet as well here, and also sneakers. So this product is not leather, but it's better. The reason why we developed this mushroom leather is because we see fashion industry is giving huge environmental impact to the world. At least 21 billion tons of CO2 emissions was emitted through this industry. and 38% of it comes from material productions, including leather manufacturing. So the big questions in industry or fashion industry is, can we have a low impact leather in the future? I think it's getting worse that animal leather that is also coming from cattle farming also contribute a lot to the environment. This industry is taking our earth landmass, consume a lot of water, and emitting high CO2 emissions from cow's burp. So on the other hand, we see consumers are shifting now. People now become more eco-conscious and push fashion brands to find alternative materials that is more responsible. That's why we see a jump demand from vegan leather that makes a global vegan leather market reach $90 billion per year. And then 50% of the demand, total demand, are coming from Asia Pacific. So we see that's a huge potential in terms of the market. That's why we find solution from nature. We call it mycelium leather or mylia. As I mentioned before, that this materials is having a lot of advantages in terms of the environmental impact. Meanwhile, in terms of the product itself, it's still having similar performance to leather. So we collecting agricultural waste. So we use agri waste collected nearby our factories, and we use that to be for mushroom medium or mushroom nutrients, or the mushroom can grow, and then they develop the mycelium part of the mushrooms that we can harvest and do post treatments to make materials similar to leather. So that's the principle or general principle of how the mycelium leather works. So back to you.
I see. Thank you, Adi, for sharing with us your product. I think there's a lot of questions that the attendees may want to ask, and I have some questions. There's some questions that I would like to ask to know more about this. But I know Ye Thu has also prepared some interesting questions on behalf of our attendees to ask Adi, especially relating to this topic about how you manage to monetize your technology, your innovations, and commercialize them effectively. We have Ye Thu back on screen. Hi, Ye Thu. So
Hello.
over to you to ask your questions.
Sure. Thank you, Pei Wen. ID, congratulations, on taking MICL Mycotech to new heights, with all those accolades and awards that you have earned over the past few years. Just 3 years ago, Mycotech started off as a social enterprise, right? Today, and you are kind of like collaborating with big names in the industry and seeking Series A funding, right? And could you share how you have transformed your social enterprise startup from your early days to where you are today?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Ye Thu. We did a lot of iterations, research in order to make sure that our product is accepted by the market. So back then, we started the business since 2012 as a mushroom farmers, just as mushroom farmers. We sell mushrooms as a food and gourmet food, even DIY mushroom kit, so people can grow it in their house. So, but in 2014, we see mushroom technology can be beyond than just a food. My background is in architecture, so we see there's a potential to be made as building material. So our first iterations before this mushroom leather is creating mushroom composite using the same technology for building applications. But along the way, we see a lot of improvement, a lot of iterations, and we did a product market fit, which innovations that can accepted by the market, and having lower entry barrier. So yeah, that's how our journey is.
Yeah, quite interesting. Yeah, and I think this question, right, everyone will be interested. Seeing how pandemic has affected many businesses, it is notable that Mycotech has still secured many order opportunities from across the world, including a pilot program with 6 major global brands. As a CEO, how do you ensure continuous value creation and growth for your company?
Yeah, I think during this pandemic, fashion industry is hit a lot, and it's affecting a lot of workers in our value chain as well. But we are very grateful that during this hard time, we're still receiving many orders that keeps our workers, our farmers, partners are occupied because they are the most vulnerable group in our value chain. Because since 2015, we are empowering local community, promoting gender equality in our value chains. We are partnering with more than 200 farmers, and the multiplier effect reached 600 people, including farmers' family member, and 50% of them are women. And then during the COVID, we see fashion brand are double down the investment in sustainability. We see COVID-19 is a watershed moment for fashion industry to not back as business as usual, and they help innovation like us as part of their Build Back Better initiative. Yeah, so we have several achievements. For example, 2 months ago was a historical moment for us as well, because we are participating at Paris Fashion Week. We collaborate with LVMH prize-winning designers called Doblet Japan. They successfully create 8 articles, including creating sustainable rebellious punk leather jackets. So they're creating leather jacket out of our Mycelium Leather. And after the runway, they came back to us with more order for next year. And you also mentioned about a pilot program with 6 global major brands. So we also collaborate with Fashion for Good, a sustainable fashion incubator that has strong network in global fashion brands. So they're helping us to orchestrate this consortium, and we will have a prototyping together, because I think for the past 3 years we did trials or prototyping with small medium brands. Now we have a chance to collaborate with big brands. So this is really important to us, because we can learn more feedback from the big brands, and hopefully after the end of a pilot, we will have a further discussions about a bigger offtake agreement.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, I myself really want to try the leather jacket that you're talking about.
Yeah, true.
Yeah, that would be very exciting actually. Yeah, I've never tried that one before.
Yeah, true.
Yeah, so maybe can you explain a little bit more about how IP or intangible assets are important, for your business growth, including all these whole series of things that you're doing, collaborating with the big brands, and also securing orders from all across the world. How these IP or intangible assets actually give you a strength to do all these things, and how important are they for you?
Yeah, so we see intangible assets is playing a big role for us. I think we see like I think you already mentioned about the registrable asset and non-registrable assets. For the registrable assets, we have a patents and trademarks. For the non-registrable assets, we have like know-how, data, about our customers, our clients, our value chain, and then we see, for example, like a trademark is also giving us a play or a bigger role as well. So, for example, when we collaborate with brands, particularly small medium brands,
We use B2B2C models, means that when we did having a deal with B2B, we want still having an engagement with the customers. So we ask brands to put our brand logo on the end products. So by having this logo on the, let's say in this wallet, the customers know about us and bring awareness to a bigger audience about what is Mylia, what is the Mycelium Leather. I think we are inspired from, for example, like Intel. They put their brand in laptop or PC product, and in fashion brands we have like Gore-Tex or Tencel that successfully exercise this. Of course, we want to try to adapt that as well in order to bring more awareness about these materials. And we also see in terms of the innovation as well, we see this innovation can bring local brands a leverage to their products. I can share in our case in small medium brands. So before using these materials, leather brands or artisan usually struggle to export their product. Some countries are banning leather sourcing from Indonesia due to the lack of wastewater treatment in leather manufacturer. But now, after using these materials, they can sell it overseas, and brand can have more margins because they bring more added value to their products to the customers, and then they sold it in overseas market, which have more purchasing power. And some brands also receiving sustainable and good design awards after using these materials. So we see these innovations can not only give environmental benefit to the brands, but also profits, more economical benefits to them.
Yeah, that's quite exciting actually. Yeah, and I believe you are increasingly expanding your market reach as well. And you know, so how do you use your intangible assets, especially for like, you know, as a tool for negotiating with the potential partners, like, you know, your JV partners? Yeah, how do you use your intangible asset? How do you position them? Yeah, when you're negotiating with them, when you're talking to them.
Yeah, so during this COVID, we also get approached by several bio-waste producer to integrate our technology and utilize their agricultural waste. So mostly they are coming from like plantations, wood plantations, pineapple plantations. They are interested to integrate the technology in order to create a zero waste, zero waste in their system. But for us, we see these partnerships can also help us to secure our productions. So because when we can tap their agricultural waste, of course, we can create more mycelium leather with lowering our production costs as well. For example, we estimating like millions of square foot by having partnership with them. So we have a initial discussion from them with them about having a JV or licensing using this technology, and somehow they also interested to contribute in terms of financial support as well. So we providing the technology and they are providing financial support. So I think it's a really great partnerships for us. Yeah, hopefully we can keep the conversations, move forward, and reach the finish line.
Yeah, that's great to hear. And I understand you're using your IP or intangible assets as a lever, right? When you're discussing with them. And of course, they being the bigger company, they definitely have a lot of cash. But what you're contributing to the JV or potential partnerships is more from the IP or intangible asset perspective. That's very aligned to what I explained, in my previous presentation, like using the IP or intangible assets as a strategic tool in the negotiations. Yeah.
Yeah, true. Yeah, I think we are also very grateful that last year we also have a exercise together with IPOS International to how we can manage our intangible assets. I think it gave us more proper strategy in order to manage our intangible assets. Before that, we don't have any idea like how we can commercialize or even manage our IP properly.
Yeah, thank you. But the most important thing is that that although you may not know a lot about IP intangible assets at that time, but that IP intangible assets are very important for a business, even for a small startup like yours. And you can see where you're now, and there's a kind of like exponential growth for your company. And now you are, I think, but by the time we were discussing is you are still developing your technology, and still talking to some of the brands and all that. But now you are kind of like really enter into negotiations with the big brands and getting orders all over the world. That's really great to hear. Yeah. And I think I have this interesting question. What are your 3 key IP initiatives that have really benefited your company? Just 3.
Yeah, sure. We see there are 3 initiatives. So first one is streamline the corporate structure and intangible asset ownerships. So we consolidating the intangible assets under a single entity to provide clarity to external entities. So for example, when we licensing our IP, it's just controls by single entity because imagine, let's say we have a partnerships with overseas or other regions in Singapore, Indonesia, Japan. It become more complex. So we streamline that by having more robust corporate structure. The second one is branding and trademark. As I mentioned, branding or trademark is having a biggest role as well. So it guides us to how to protect those trademarks in several key markets under relevant classes. So last time we only have our company name is Mycotech.
Yep.
But after we just focused back then, we just focused on Indonesia, but somehow we didn't realize that it has a global potential to bring it to overseas. So when we check like in other countries, somehow there are Mycotech trademark already registered. So that's why we need to step back again and rebrand it using MYCL brand. So that's one of the reason we see the trademark is also important, and we want to expand it to overseas. And then the third one is technology protection strategy. Means last time we see only patents or registrable assets is having an important role, but now we see trademarks, trade secrets, know-how is playing an important role. So now we managing those non-registrable assets in proper way. For example, we put a proper documentations for know-how. So we wrote it, we listed, and somehow we also secure it or protect it internally. So because we see it also having a biggest role as well. And for startup like us that has limited resources, of course, trade secret is the cheaper options to protect our secret, to protect our IP.
Exactly.
Otherwise, we need to spend like $100,000 just to file a new patent.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, I think just to recap, you said you streamline your corporate, structure in terms of like where to park your IP or intangible assets. I think that's really important because you did the right thing that, when you are talking to the potential investors, when they're doing the due diligence process, there's a clear chain of title issues, there's a clear chain of title in terms of, your IP assets. I think that's a great thing that you did. And second thing that, you realize when you realize that there's a brand out there, Mycotech brand out there, and that might be by potentially prohibiting you to enter into that market, right? So that's why you rebranded it. I think we always say, when's the best time to rebrand? It's actually yesterday, because brand value grows over time, right? So you need to capture whenever you do things, the brand you're capturing the brand value. So that's why it's very important to make sure that your brand is right at the start. Secure the brand, file the trademark, and think about the countries that you're going, and then reserve the trademarks in those particular countries that you're going to enter. So I think that's really important exercise, and I believe that's a major decision for you, I believe. Yeah. And last but not least, I think technology protection strategy that you talk about, I think it's really important because for a startup like yours, patents definitely is expensive. We're not saying that you shouldn't file patent. You definitely should file patent for those inventions that really should be protected under patents. But enterprises or startups like yours need to be aware of the other options like trade secrets to make sure that those inventions which are very difficult to detect by the outside people or third parties, right, should still be protected as a trade secret, right? If you file a patent, definitely it will be published and all over the world, will know about your inventions. Yeah, right. So I think these are the very three important aspects on how you see the IP or IAs. Last but not least, right? Maybe I just want to ask one final question. Having gone through the innovation journey, right, from ideation to protection and now commercialization, what insider advice and actionable tips you can share with your fellow startup founders in this webinar?
Yeah, I think first one is we need to bring more awareness about the importance of intangible assets among the team. Last time we only focused on the founder, but we see it's also important to bring this awareness to your team because in our case, this topic is very uncommon. So we are lack of knowledge about this. So I think it's a really good investment if you put your team, join the webinar like this through IPOS, because somehow it's also free. So, but it gives more benefit to your team because, for example, when you develop innovation, somehow there are new IPs or intangible assets occur. But when your team also have the same framework as you, how to manage your IP, I think it's a really good start before you file it or even secure it or protect it into legal things. And then the second one is identify what is your IP. So for example, what is the innovations or intangible assets you need to protect? Probably you need to file it to patents. But if you think that, I think we just do trade secret, so just keep it as trade secret. So by having these identifications early, it also saves you some money. So yeah, that's I think the tips for early stage startups like us.
Yeah, thank you, Adi, and that was very, very insightful. And now we are on to our final segment of the webinar, our Q&A segment. I will hand the time back to our host, Pei Wen, who will take us through any burning questions our audience may have.
Sure. Thanks, Ye Thu. So I was just wanting to ask Adi. Adi, do you have any questions? Do you want to take this opportunity to ask Ye Thu for any tips?
Yeah.
All good, all good.
Yeah, yeah. Usually, I always ask you to through WhatsApp, like, but I think this is a really good chance for the others. For example, like the early startup like us. But in your opinion, as IP strategy, how do you think, or what is the best way for them to protect their intangible asset, or yeah, and commercialize it? What is the um, yeah good fit strategy for early stage startups?
Yeah. So, okay, basically for startups, as you said, they have limited resources, right? So they definitely cannot, do try and error. So they have to choose the best option. So to do that, they definitely need to know what type of intangible assets they have. So always start with the, identification of IP or intangible assets they have. That includes their patentable inventions, trade secrets, know-how, and brands and trademarks, of course. So basically, after identifying all those intangible assets, they, of course, you also need to see, which level they are at right now, right? If it's very far from commercialization, of course, they still need to continue their R&D. If it is really closer towards a commercialization stage, they can actually think about, one of the commercialization model, one of a mix of the commercialization models that I've presented in my presentation recently, right? So they can actually choose one of the models that actually fits the business objective. That's why I always repeat, what's the mission and vision of the company, and what do they want to be? Do they want to become a kind of like supplier of some materials, or they just want to license out the technologies to others and they just focus on R&D, for continuous innovation? So it really depends on the company's mission and vision, and they can actually choose one or two of the relevant commercialization options that I've presented earlier. Yeah.
Right. If I can quickly jump in here, right? There's one question from the attendees regarding the budget. So the person is asking, you know, what what would be the initial amount of money that a company is needed to spend on protecting your IP, and how should a company think about doing the budgeting for IP protection?
That's a very difficult question. Really depends on the size of the company, of course, and also what's the stage of your company? Are you a very early stage startup, or are you a kind of like already commercializing your products or services in the maybe 10 markets or 20 markets? Based on that, your budget definitely varied a lot, right? So of course, what's the budget that they can actually consider? It really depends on what type of assets that they have as well. If their innovation or invention is more suitable for trade secret, protection, then of course they can actually minimize all the costs and need to spend the resources on managing the trade secrets internally to make sure that the trade secrets are not leaked out to third parties, right? But if the invention or if the technology is more suitable for patent protection, and you still want to go into the countries like US or some countries like Germany in the Europe, right? They definitely need to go through the patent filing route. So in that case, the cost will go up. So it really depends on the stage of the company, the type of the industry that they are at, the invention that they have. Yeah. So based on that, they can actually identify the right budget, estimated budget for their IP. Yeah. Protection. Yeah.
Yeah. In our case, yeah, of course, we see intangible assets is taking a lot of resources, and then but somehow we can finance it through grants, or let's say if we have an award and then there's a prize for it. Usually we put it as a like, yeah, the IP things. So I think it helps for the early stage startups to maintain their cash flow. Otherwise, it's very difficult to finance it. So if you can find some grants that can help you to finance it, or for example, filing the trademarks or even the patents, it's very helpful for you.
Yeah.
That's what I'm strategy. Yeah, what we have on strategy.
Yeah, that's right. And the local enterprises definitely can tap on, the grants like EDG or MRA, especially when they go overseas, right? Which actually cover some IP filing costs as well. So definitely can tap on those government grants if you're a local company. Yeah.
Yeah. There's one question that I thought is quite interesting. And is for Adi. She would like to know, how do you determine your IA/IP strategy expansion by country?
Yeah, so yeah, this is something that we also exercise when we strategize or managing the IP, or for example, the trademark. So we identify who is the biggest customers in our pipeline, and we see, because we focus on Asia, so we see Japan as the biggest one right now. So that's why we extend it first in Japan. Of course, we have a list, long list, but we prioritize at least the existing customers, because somehow when you do agreements with local or potential customers there, usually you need to put like the intangible assets as well. Otherwise, they will have an opportunity to take it over from you.
Okay, so you will identify the market first, and then look back at your intangible assets and decide whether or not this market is worth going in, and then prepare, did all your protections before you enter into the market.
Exactly. Yeah. Otherwise, it's totally different if we have like a lot of resources.
I see. So you need selective.
Yes. Exactly.
Yeah. I don't know. I think this is quite a related question. So could be for Ye Thu or for Adi. This person asks, where should an external analysis be done, and what should we look at to inform the IP strategy? So would it be before you enter into the market, or maybe after you enter into the market? When would be a good time for us to do this analysis and to look at the IP strategy?
Okay,
Yeah.
maybe I'm not sure. Maybe Adi, you can add on later, from your perspective as well. When you're talking about external analysis, maybe there are a few ways of doing it, like market research or pattern analytics. So let me explain a little bit more about pattern analytics, right? So if somebody is entering into the new markets, they definitely can do some kind of pattern landscape search and extract insights from those patterns data to see who are the competitors in the market, or might be the, I don't know, maybe potential collaborators as well, right? If the technologies complement to each other, and based on that data, they can actually have some idea of how to craft a strategy as well. And of course, pattern analytics alone definitely not enough to enter the market. They have also need to do some kind of market research and all that. So combine these two data, correlate these data, and definitely you will get some kind of like better insights before you enter into the market. Yeah.
Yeah.
ID. Yeah.
Yeah. So for I think it depends on the market you want to enter. For litigious countries, like for example like the US, of course, I think you need more proper research on that, or even do freedom to operate search as well, FTO search. But if you see the target market you see is having no competitors, and it's quite open for your innovations, I think you can do your own research. That doesn't require like external parties or consultant to do that.
I see. All right. I think time is running out. I will probably ask the last question, and this is more. This question is more light. James would like to know, for Adi, have you been able to drive home your value proposition to potential customers who may not be actively seeking vegan leather, or have most of your customers been actively seeking vegan leather?
Yeah.
The first option is obviously more difficult, but both are certainly viable options for company growth. Do you have any stories to share?
Yeah. So this is something that we also discussed internally about our value proposition. So that's why we don't want to narrow it only to the vegan customers. So that's why we just focus on yes, this material is from mushroom leather. Of course, it's plant-based, probably aligned with vegan value, but our main target is fashion brands that are actively seeking new innovative materials that help them to become more responsible in terms of the environment, because either animal or synthetic leather right now is still not 100% sustainable. So we set our value proposition as a another options for them to helps them to reach their sustainability goals.
I see. Okay. Maybe one last question to Ye Thu. How should a startup select IP lawyers to work with? Any tips for that?
Yeah, I think you can actually choose the service providers or maybe IP firms, law firms, right, who might be more familiar with the technology. I think that will be very helpful. If your technology is in the electronics industry or semicon industry, you better find the patent agents, the lawyers who might be more familiar with the industries. So in that aspect, they can actually better understand about technology, can appreciate the uniqueness of the technology, etc. So I think that's a very simple tip, that I can give.
All right, thank you. So before we end the session, any last question or last comments from Adi or Ye Thu that you would like to share with our attendees?
Maybe, okay, just one thing. Before you do anything, you need to know first. You need to know what you have first, right? So be aware of what are the options available, and also understand what are the key intangible assets or IP that you have, so that when the opportunity comes, you can actually tap on it and grow faster.
Thank you, Ye Thu.
Yeah, for me, I think even for me is the managing intangible asset is always new. There are always new things when we discuss about this. So yeah, I think it's really grateful that we have like IPOS here that providing a lot of new knowledge and new resources related to the IP things. So new startups or early stage like us, we can learn more and have a proper strategy to manage the IP. Because as Ye Thu mentioned, nowadays a lot of companies are depending on intangible assets to value their companies, and we see that as a trend, and we want to try to optimize it. I'm very surprised that nowadays a lot of companies are only is able to just sell their product only the IP things. So yeah, it's new for me, and hopefully for the early stage startups can bring awareness more about IP in the company.
Thank you, Adi. Thank you. To the all attendees, sorry that we couldn't answer all the questions. There's still some pending questions. We'll try to address them privately, as many as we can. But before we move on to close the session for today, can we get your help to provide some feedback via the survey poll questions that we'll be launching very soon? And so while you're doing the feedback, before we end, I'd like to reshare the summary tips from Ye Thu as a recap. All right, so the key takeaways: to align, consider, and then to align your IPI management and commercialization with your corporate mission and vision, to consider all the commercialization pathway, which creates value, to maintain value creation and value capture. And last but not least, to establish a clear policy and guidelines in your company approach towards IA/IP commercialization. If you have any questions, you can also connect directly with Ye Thu. So this is his email address. He can be found on LinkedIn as well. Ye Thu is very helpful, so you can just approach him if there's certain things that we have not covered and you'd like to learn more. And last but not least, there's also some resources that you can tap on. These are the business guides that they are complimentary on our website to download. So feel free to go over and take a look. Okay, and so once again, my name is Pei Wen, and on behalf of all our speakers today, we'd like to thank you for spending an hour with us, and I hope this is a good investment for your time. So we look forward to seeing you again and at another IP Expert Series event soon. Have a good day.